What's good on YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Super Sentai. Super Sentai is a popular show in Japan that is something that in America we get something like it, which is called Power Rangers. Thing is that when it comes to Power Rangers, we tend to get the Ranger fights, the Megazord fights, and a lot of the monster fight footage as well. But there's a lot of story elements and other things that are unique to America and also unique to Japan. So the thing is that as of Thursday, we started getting information regarding the next season that's going to be airing this February for Super Sentai, which is going to be the 42nd season. And a couple of months ago, we got confirmation about the trademarks for the names of the next season. And the thing is that it was unique because we got two trademarks. Usually we get one trademark basically telling us, okay, that's the next season. We know that it's going to be called whatever the season's going to be called. Thing is that we got two trademarks, so we were like, are we getting two seasons? Are we getting one season where there's going to be two teams? How is this going to work? And we got that answered as of Thursday, which is that it's going to be one season with two teams. And we also got a lot of other information. Now, I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing exactly for this video. I might do multiple videos. I was initially going to do one big video, but there's so much content that was just revealed. And yet at the same time, we know a lot, but we really don't know as much as we think we do because we only know so much. But I wanted to talk about everything that we are aware of, and I might split this into multiple parts, and I will determine that as I make this video. So you'll figure that out, and I'll figure that out, obviously. So I'd love to know your guys' opinion of everything as I talk about this, but let me get started. So the show is going to be called Kaito Sentai Lupinranger versus Kisatsu Sentai Patoranger. Now, as far as things go, the name can be referred to both ways. I've seen it both ways. I personally referred to it Power Ranger before Lupinranger, and a lot of people have said that. In fact, it's much more common. But as far as the logos go, we can see that they refer to it as Lupinranger first. And personally, I'll tell you this much right now, I love the logos. I think the logos look really, really cool. I like the colors. I like the different effects. I like the fonts for the two of them. They work really well and they just seem really cool. So that's something great to mention. Something that I didn't even notice till someone pointed out to me was how cool the logos were. And I was like, oh my god, I didn't even notice that. I'm so distracted by all the other images that I saw. And then I look at the logos and I'm like, wow, that's actually pretty cool. So that is something. So continuing on, I wanted to talk about the Ranger suits, and that might be the main thing that I'll be talking about today. We've gotten the story, we've gotten a whole bunch of other things that I want to talk about, but this video might just focus just on the Ranger suits and some initial impressions and stuff. But they've also revealed toy scans, story details, the different merchandise items, the pricing for different things. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that's been revealed, different details. I mean, even though we haven't had an episode yet, we still know a bunch, and that's really great. Again, this is not necessarily the greatest thing ever, but I'm excited because anytime that we get anything related to this franchise, I get really hyped because it's always something interesting. And you know, Q-Ranger, the most recent season, Uchu Sentai Q-Ranger, is almost done. It's going to be done during the first week of February, and this show is going to be starting February 11th. I wanted to mention that right up front. Yes, February 11th, and people are expecting that the last episode will be the 48th episode. We are currently, as of Sunday, going to be having the 41st episode release. So yeah, not that far away from being done with the current season. So anyway, getting back to Lupinranger versus Power Ranger. Let me discuss my opinions of the suits. Personally, I like the Lupinranger suits a lot more than the Power Ranger suits, but they're both cool. The Lupinranger suits are much darker as opposed to the Power Ranger suits, which are a lot lighter. As we can see, the Lupinranger suits actually have black as a focus, as opposed to the Power Ranger suits, which have a lot more white. Now, that could imply, that also has to do with the fact that the Lupinrangers are supposed to be thieves, and the Power Rangers are supposed to be cops. So it's supposed to be cops and robbers. And that is something that's been talked about. And yet a lot of people thought, with those themings in mind, that they would be enemies. They are, but there's a little bit more to it than just them being enemies, and we'll get into that with the story, and I might talk about that after I talk about the suits a little bit more. So, for sure, as I want to talk about the suits, as we can see with the visors, the Lupinrangers have sort of like wizard hats, or something along those lines, like top hats, you could say, as opposed to the Power Rangers, which have police officer caps, which is cool. And they're part of the visor. They're not actually wearing those, like a top hat and a police officer hat. So that's kind of interesting. As far as the colors go, as we can see, we have red, yellow, and blue for the Lupinrangers, and red, pink, and green for the Power Rangers. It's obviously interesting to note that both have a red, and we have some interesting colors. Pretty standard, but I like the colors. We've seen them a bunch of times for several different seasons over the years. So not necessarily the most unusual colors, but I do like them. As far as how they're going to be referred to in the show, because that's always important, they tend to do different things in the roll calls when they transform. The Lupinrangers are going to be referred to as Lupin Red, Lupin Blue, and Lupin Yellow. The Power Rangers, on the other hand, are not going to be referred to as Pato Red and Pato Pink and Pato Green. No, they are going to be referred to as Pato Ren Ichigo for red, Pato Ren Nigo for green, and Pato Ren Sango for pink. So that is interesting, and that is good. We haven't had Ichigo, Nigo, and Sango since ToQger, the 38th season, which that was, Resha Sentai ToQger. So that is important to remember. And this is going to be an interesting season. I want to talk more about some of the other details that I've found out, specifically regarding the story. I'm sure many of you are interested in that. And the story is pretty interesting. What we've found out is that the basic summary says, the Lupin Collection, a collection of treasures with the power to destroy the world. When enemies from another world, the Ganglers, steal it, 2 Sentais are employed to stop them. Dancing in the sky, vowing to reclaim the collection, Kaito Sentai Lupinranger. With heart speeding fast, vowing to take down the Ganglers, Kisatsu Sentai Power Ranger. For the first time in Sentai history, there will be 2 true simultaneous teams. Catch a glimpse as the curtain rises on these shocking events. And that was basically what the summary says. So that's pretty cool. As we can see, 2 different teams. What it does sound like, because that there are 2 teams employed to stop the Ganglers from from getting back these treasures and protecting the world, it sort of sounds like, rather than them being enemies, which is what a lot of people thought at first. People were thinking, these guys are going to be against each other, they're going to fight each other, they're just going to be purely enemies, similar to how Kamen Rider works, where they tend to have it where, you'll have the Kamen Riders that are at first evil, and then eventually they'll turn good. In this case, it seems like they have the same intention. It seems like they're not against each other. Well, they're against each other, but it seems more like they're competing, and they're more of rivals rather than enemies. So in other words, the Power Rangers and the Lupinrangers are good. They're both good. They're not evil. Neither one is evil. They're both good teams. It's just that they're 2 different teams doing their own things, and what you can imagine is that eventually they'll go from being 2 separate teams doing their own things, trying to accomplish the same goal, but eventually will lead into them becoming one united team. That is something that I actually appreciate a lot. I like the concept there. I think that's a really cool idea. I think that could be really, really neat in the future of the show. I think that that's just a really cool concept, and there's a lot of focus on that united feeling throughout the merchandise, the story, and just there's a lot of hints towards that fusion and connection, and being together and being united mentality here. So it definitely seems like that's the eventual goal, that they will become one main team, but will still have their own names. They won't suddenly take sides or whatever. Although that could happen. We actually don't know. They could do something clever like that in the story. I would not be against that. That would be very interesting to see what they could do, because they could really play into that in a lot of ways and be really clever with everything. So I want to talk about some other stuff that we found out. We got images regarding the merchandise. So we got to see the different mechas, and also the individual mechas that make up the main mecha, or in America, the Megazord. So as far as things go, the Lupinrangers have jets and other flying vehicles, as opposed to the Power Rangers, which have land vehicles. Interesting concept. What's also cool is that each of the vehicles have two modes. So there's one mode which is just them in their plain vehicle mode, and then there is a mode where they turn into a weapon or something else. So they still keep the general appearance, but they add some sort of weapon to their design, which is cool, and some of them are really neat with the designs because of that. So I wanted to talk about each of them because we got information regarding that. I want to start off by explaining the names and everything. So for example, the vehicles are called, for the Lupinrangers, the VSV DX Dial Fighters. So VSV, what is that? VSV has to do with versus, because there's a whole aspect of versus, and then the V stands for vehicles. So it's versus vehicles DX dial fighters. What is dial? So the thing is that has to do with how they're differentiating the two teams. All the mechas, all the merchandise that is related to Lupinrangers has dial connected to it. All the ones that are specific to Power Rangers has trigger connected to it. So, for example, the names for the Power Ranger mechas are the VSV trigger machines. And, for example, let's say we're talking about the Dial Fighters. The Dial Fighters, they refer to them each time as a fighter, as opposed to the Trigger Machines. Rather than saying fighter at the end, they say the number of the members. So, for example, if we're talking about Patoranger Ichigo, they refer to it as VSV Trigger Machine Ichigo. Same with Nigo and Sango, similar ideas. So I want to talk about each one of them. The Red Dial Fighter is a jet, which has a second mode for its gimmick, which is a beam attack. So it will have some sort of attachment or secondary mode that will allow it to have a beam. I don't know how it's going to work merchandise-wise, but it should be interesting. I think I've seen it. I'm not sure. But then for the Blue Dial Fighter, it's supposed to be a propeller plane, and its secondary mode is a Gatling attack. So it has like a Gatling gun. And I've seen that. And then the Yellow Dial Fighter has a transverse rotor craft, which is interesting. And it's going to have, for its secondary mode, cutting blades. So that's cool. And in all these cases, they link with other items. So it doesn't necessarily just mean that they link with each other. They link with other items as well. Additionally, we have it where the Trigger Machines are interesting, because as we said, Trigger Machines are land vehicles. So we don't know all the vehicles, what they're actually supposed to be. As for each one of them right now, that's actually kind of an interesting thing. We actually don't know what the actual vehicles are, but we know what the gimmick features are. So the gimmick feature for the for Ichigo is wheels open up and something else happens. We're not really sure about that one fully. We know that Nigo has a cannon for his secondary mode, and we know that Sango has a police baton, which is cool and makes sense because they're based off of police officers, so that's kind of neat. And similar stuff follows there. As far as the transformation device, it is called the Double Henshin Ju transformation gun DX versus, and the thing is that if it's for the Lupin Rangers, they refer to it as Lupin Red set, as opposed to the Power Rangers where they just changed it to Patoranger Ichigo set. So the big difference is the Dial Fighters is that if you is that basically it seems like it comes with the two different machines, I would imagine. It's not really clear as to how this works because it says that there's two different sets. So I'm hoping, I really am hoping that that doesn't mean that you have to buy two different morphers, because they're supposed to work. They're supposed to be the same morpher. So I don't understand exactly how that works, because it says this, yet at the same time, what's also important to remember is that the device is supposed to work. Is that the changer is supposed to work for both the Lupin Rangers and the Power Rangers. They're supposed to be able to share the same changer. That's the whole point here. The only difference is that what they use to transform is different because, you know, one's one and one's the other. So, you know, they're not going to make them the same entirely. And the thing is that what they say with the Power Ranger Ichigo set is it's supposed to have the Trigger Machine 1, and for the Lupin Ranger set, it's supposed to have the red dial fire. So I'm not really sure what that means, but it is something interesting to note. I wanted to also talk about other things that we got revealed. We got revealed one of the roleplay weapons. So that's something very typical we get introduced to very early on, like the first roleplay weapon. For the Lupin Rangers, they have a weapon used by the 3 Lupin Rangers that transforms from a sword mode to a reacher grabber mode with a lever extremity that moves. So it's called the what do you call it? The Itadaki Kaito, which in America translates to Taking Thief Sword, and that's kind of a neat name. And as far as the other one for the Power Rangers, it's called the Kakuzi Kaibo Mega Bow, which is supposed to be a police baton, which is supposed to be a weapon for the Power Rangers, and it translates to voice amplifier baton. So Taking Thief Sword and voice amplifier baton. Again, I do not speak Japanese to the extent that I could really say anything. Like I know a couple words here and there, but I do not like know it to the point that I can say everything properly. So as far as things go with the voice amplifier baton, it has 2 modes similar to the Lupin sword, which had the sword mode and the grabber mode to steal things. The voice amplifier baton has a police baton mode, and it also has a mode which turns it into a megaphone. So that's kind of cool, and it makes sense because, you know, police officers, you know, there's the traditional baton, but also, like, you know, they have the megaphone where they say, come out with your hands up or whatever, you know. So that's something as well, and that's kind of cool. So that's neat. And as far as things go, otherwise, they do have the vinyl figures. Vinyl figures are very common. They have ones for each one of the Rangers, but they also have one for something special that's coming in March. That is for Patoranger Ugo. Now, many of you might be thinking to yourself, Ugo, so is that like a 7th member for the team? And I'll show you the image of what that character looks like. Ugo is interesting because what it is, and Lupin Ranger has their own thing, is it's basically something that's meant for the Power Rangers finisher. So what happens is that when the Power Rangers do their finisher, what happens is that the 3 of them fuse together and become one, called Patoranger Ugo, which is a combination of the 3, which basically what happens is that I believe it's like the left side or it's the right side becomes the is the Pink Ranger, the right side is the Green Ranger, and the middle is the Red Ranger, and they become one ranger during their finisher and do a finishing move. I don't know how that works as regard to weapons or anything like that, but we know that that's going to be a unique form that's going to be coming in March. As far as things go, otherwise, we know, if you're wondering what the special mode for the what do you call it, the Lupinrangers, they aren't going to combine together, but they're going to multiply. So there will be multiple copies of themselves that will come out and they will do attacks together. I don't know all the details regarding that, but that is something interesting. They also have the VSV, which is, you know, the Versus Vehicle Double Henshin DX Good Striker, which is a special vehicle that is a big versus vehicle used by the two teams. The dial and the trigger activates sounds and voices, and has two modes, dial fighter and trigger machines. So, you know, the two modes are based on the two different themes, and what happens is that it activates sounds and voices when connected to the versus changer. So in other words, you take the versus changer, so the one that the changing, you know, the morpher, the changer, and you attach it to the good striker, and what will happen is that sounds and voices will come out of it, and then what will happen is that it will transform with the other versus vehicles to form a robot. And the thing is that that's an example of that mix and morph kind of thing that they have, where there's supposed to be the ability for a lot of the vehicles to work together. Specifically, things like this will be able to work interchangeably between each other. So that's kind of cool as well. Continuing on, I wanted to talk about other things. We got, there's going to be the specific sets. So as we know, I mentioned all the individual fighters and also the different, you know, the trigger machines and the dial fighters. Thing is that it's not going to be limited to you having to buy each individual one, which you can do that. But what you can also do, because let's just say I don't want the changer, I just want the mecha for the initial release. I can do that, and what that is called is the VSV Kaito Gatai DX Lupin Kaiser set, which is the name for the mecha. So the mecha for the Lupinrangers is called Lupin Kaiser, and the mecha for the Patorangers is Pato Kaiser. So for what these two make up, the Lupin Kaiser includes a set of 4 versus vehicles, which include the Good Striker, red, blue, and yellow dial fighters, and the VSV Kisatsu Gatai DX Pato Kaiser set, which is the set of 4 versus vehicles, including the Good Striker, the Trigger Machines, Ichigo, Nigo, and Sango. So in other words, both cases you get all the parts that you need to get the mecha, but you also get the Good Striker in both cases. I don't know if the Good Strikers are, if that means that if you buy both sets you're getting 2 of the same thing, or if you're getting a variant if you get one versus the other. That is not really clear here. It sort of sounds like it's its own thing and they both just use the same thing. So I would imagine you're probably just going to get 2, if anything, or you can get these individually. I don't, you know, it's up to you. Personally, for me, I might choose to get them individually just because of how they're doing things. Typically, they don't do it this way. It's a little different that they're doing it as individual releases this way. Usually, they just do one big release, and then they'll have the individual releases happening at the same time. So both will happen simultaneously rather than doing individual, and then combine. So that's kind of weird. I don't know why they decided to do that this year. As far as other merchandise goes, I'm trying to see what else there is. They've revealed special versus vehicles like the Cyclone Dial Fighter, which released in late March, which has a mode change for blades of a propeller that open on its side, and that's supposed to be a twin rotor craft, so it's different than the other rotorcraft, which was for I believe Lupin Yellow. And then there's the VSV DX trigger machine, which will be the first additional trigger machine, which will be the white police bike, and the mode change will open like a yo-yo apparently and go in all directions. And that's what they say, although it's not really clear what that means. So that's about it. That's most of the information that I have. I have lots of images I'm sure I've shown throughout this video. Again, this is a long video just because there's a lot to talk about. I wasn't expecting so much information to talk about, but I do think that I'm going to be doing a lot more toy scan overviews and discussions about that. Also, once we start Lupinranger versus Power Ranger, I may also do the summary, like the rumors and summary videos that I've been wanting to do for those. So that basically means is that anytime that we get summaries or information or even pictures for Lupinranger and Power Ranger, I might start doing that similar to how I do it with Power Rangers now. I might start doing a similar thing for Lupin versus Power Ranger, and if I continue with Kamen Rider after Build, I might do the same thing with whatever the follow-up is, because I'm not sure if I want to do it now because we're already a bit of a way into Build, but I might do it, but we'll see. So that's about it for me. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I know this video was very long. I was not expecting this video to be as long as it was, but I just had a lot to talk about. Again, this all has been revealed over time now. There's been a ton of discussion. People have continuously been talking about it. I'm very excited just to see how it's going to work out. I don't know anything really. As far as things go with the Versus movie, that's something that we typically get every year. It so far and currently sounds like we're not getting one this year, at least as of now. That doesn't mean it's not happening, but as of now, we have no confirmation regarding a Versus movie. For those who don't know what a Versus movie is, Versus movies are something that happens pretty much every year. It's been happening for, I don't even know, it's been going on for at least 30 plus years now, easily, where basically the most recent season and the season that happened just prior to the most recent season. So for example, the most recent season is Uchu Sentai Q Ranger, and the past season was Dubutsu Sentai Ju-Oger. So what that would mean is that the two teams would come together and have a movie together, and they might fight their own enemies, they might fight an original enemy, they might do both, and then usually it will be the first time that we get the reveals for the next season as far as footage goes. So that will be like our first opportunity to see them fight using some of their abilities and getting a real glimpse at like what they do that's unique about each of them, and it gives us a real heads up. So that's something that's important. I don't know if that's happening. I feel like it's probably not at this point, but maybe they'll try to do something creative in Uchu Sentai Q Ranger, where they'll do an epilogue episode where maybe they'll kind of preview them. I don't know anything yet. It's so hard to say. It's just very unusual because they always do Versus movies, and yet they didn't do anything like that this year. I also wanted to mention, I don't know anything about the actors yet. That's something that we have to wait and hear about. That I'll definitely talk about when we get that information, so you guys can get a sense of how they'll look. Also, when we get the first trailer, which should come out in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I would imagine, I'll definitely talk about that, because that will give us a better impression of how the mechas will look in the show, and also how the Rangers will be as far as fighting goes, and also our first images of the grunts. Grunts, in other words, like foot soldiers. So, for example, the current season we have the Endeavors, so I'm very curious about what they're going to do for the grunts, or whatever you want to call them, for this season, and if they're going to be 2 different sets. The point is that they're supposed to have the same villain, so that's something interesting. I just don't know anything for sure yet regarding the overall story. The story, all we know is what I told you of the summary, so keep it in mind. But as a whole, I'm very excited for all this. Is it something, would I say that this is one of the more exciting seasons for me? No. I mean, it's definitely not one of the more exciting seasons for me, but it's more exciting than, like, a couple of the more recent seasons. I've loved Q-Ranger, but I wouldn't say the same thing for Zyuohger, for Ninja, and Tokyuger I liked, but that's not the most popular opinion. A lot of people like it, a lot of people really don't like it. So again, it's sort of a situation where I have to say I'm definitely interested in seeing where this will go, and I do want to tell you up front that I will be getting a bunch of the merchandise. I'm not going to get it all, but I'll tell you this much right now, because what I've seen regarding prices, it does sound the prices are pretty reasonable. Sometimes they're really, really high and inflated, and I'm like, pass. These prices are pretty fair, so I might actually buy a decent amount of stuff just because of how fair the prices are this time. So keep that in mind. If you're curious about how much certain things are, I can tell you. If you want to know where you can find this stuff, I can also inform you guys. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I know this video was very long. I might split this up. I don't know. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.